The grim darkness of the far future is not kind to the weak, and the hives of Tyros, Ix are a brutal proof of that truth. Carrick Voss awoke to the stench of recycled air, the faint metallic tang of industry, and the omnipresent smell of soot and burned oil that clung to the walls of his hab cube. The space was small, barely more than a metal coffin, with a thin mattress that offered little comfort and a data slate flickering with the day's contracts. Outside, the hive city throbbed like a living organism, the towers piercing the smoky sky, their lights a chaotic pulse of neon, warning signals, and the flicker of advertisements hawking everything from psychotropic stimulants to black market weapons. The streets below were a river of humanity, mutants, servitors, and the occasional gang enforcer, each moving with their own urgency, oblivious to the dangers that stalked above and below. Carrick rubbed his eyes, old scars itching in protest, and examined the data slate. 3 contracts were active, each more dangerous than the last. A rogue psyker hiding in the Underhives, a smuggler trafficking illicit gene seed, and a traitor who had dared sell Imperial secrets to the Tau. Each was a potential payday, each a potential death sentence. In the Imperium, a hunter's reputation was their only currency, and Carrick's had been built on patience, observation, and ruthlessness. A single mistake could end it all. He rose, the metal of his boots clanging softly against the floor, and checked his weapons. His pulse pistol gleamed faintly under the flickering light, its cooling vents hissing. The chainsword and heirloom of countless hunts hung by his side, its hum silent but menacing, a promise of swift death for those foolish enough to cross him. On his belt, several tracking devices and bio-scanners, capable of detecting heat, movement, and even subtle psychic signatures, were secured. His tools were extensions of himself. Without them, he was just another face lost in the hive's chaos. The descent into the Underhive was never easy. Elevators were few, and stairwells twisted like the insides of some enormous, living beast. The air grew heavier with each level, saturated with the fumes of industrial waste, rot, and something Carrick could not quite name, something that hinted at the warp's subtle corruption. The Underhive was lawless. Gangs ruled sectors as if the Emperor had never existed. Scavengers scavenged the remains of worlds abandoned by the Imperium, and mutants skulked in the shadows, deformed but cunning. Carrick moved through it all like a shadow, eyes sharp, senses stretched. The first target, the rogue psyker, was young, terrified, and incredibly dangerous. Carrick had tracked her subtle psychic signatures for days, watching her patterns, noting her allies, the paths she took through the labyrinthine Underhive. Every corner, every vent shaft, every flickering light could conceal threats, not only from her, but from others who might cross his path. He had learned long ago that patience often outweighed speed. Hunters who moved too fast often ended up as prey. The flickering lights of a long-abandoned manufacturing bay illuminated his path as he stalked through the tunnels. Water pooled on the floor, its surface reflecting broken neon signs from levels above. Mutated rats, enormous and glowing faintly from some chemical contamination, scuttled away at his approach. A scavenger drone whirred past, its sensors blinking erratically, no doubt scanning for anything edible or valuable. Carrick ignored them. His focus was on the girl. He caught her first glimpse in a narrow alley, pressed against the wall, eyes glowing faintly in the dim light. She was small, trembling, yet instinctively aware of her surroundings. Her psychic signature pulsed in waves, subtle but erratic, betraying fear and desperation. She darted down a side corridor, disappearing behind rusted stairwells and ventilation shafts. Carrick followed, his movements silent, deliberate, a predator moving through the chaos. She led him through a twisted maze of corridors, past collapsed walls and broken machinery, past hives of gangsters and mutants alike. She was clever, using her psychic abilities to create illusions, faint whispers, flickering shadows, distortions that missiled his scanners. Yet Carrick anticipated her. He had studied her patterns, her hesitations, the way her mind rippled under stress. He wasn't chasing blindly. He was shaping the hunt. Finally, he cornered her in a dead-end corridor. The walls were smeared with grime, the floor slick with sludge. Her eyes widened, the faint glow of her psychic power flaring as she realized she had nowhere to run. Carrick didn't raise his chainsword immediately. The first step in a successful hunt was interrogation. The girl was terrified, but she offered him a choice. She could be handed over to the Imperium, her fate sealed as a prisoner, a weapon to be controlled, or she could provide information on a far more dangerous target, one that could pay far more than her bounty. Carrick studied her, noting every micro-expression, every twitch, every flicker of deceit. He had learned long ago that instincts alone were not enough. Understanding motives, calculating risk, predicting behavior, these were the true skills of a hunter. After a long pause, he chose pragmatism over morality. The girl would lead him to the next hunt. The chainsword remained silent at his side, the pulse pistol holstered. As he followed her deeper into the Underhive, the tunnels twisted, turned, and descended further into darkness. Here, the air was thick with corruption, tainted by warp residue and industrial poison. Shadows moved on their own, flickering in the dim light, whispering secrets that were sometimes real, sometimes illusions. Carrick moved cautiously. Every step could trigger traps, alert rival hunters, or draw the attention of gangs who would happily turn both of them into target practice. Survival here required vigilance, cunning, and an almost supernatural patience. Hours passed as they navigated the maze. Occasionally, the girl would stop, point, whisper warnings of patrols or hidden dangers. Carrick paid attention, but he remained alert for deception. The Imperium rewarded neither kindness nor mercy. It rewarded survival and results. Any error could cost him not just the contract, but his life. Yet even in this deadly environment, there was a rhythm to the hunt. The chase was as much mental as physical. Carrick analyzed, predicted, and adapted with every move she made. They reached a larger chamber, long abandoned, filled with the remains of ancient machinery and the corpses of failed industrial drones. The girl hesitated. She had led him into what appeared to be a den, a nest of mutant scavengers and roguish psychers hiding from the Imperium. Carrick's pulse pistol was ready, chainsword humming faintly. He did not flinch. He had faced worse, survived worse, and in this place, only the cunning survived. Mutant eyes glinted in the shadows, psychic energy rippling faintly from unseen sources. The air was thick with tension, the quiet broken only by the faint drip of water and the distant hum of industrial machinery far above. Carrick moved slowly, deliberately. His senses stretched to the limit. Every corner, every shadow, every flicker of light could conceal a deadly threat. The girl's psychic flares lit up intermittently, betraying her fear, but also providing clues to the threats ahead. He knew the first encounter would set the tone for the rest of the hunt. Every misstep would embolden the prey, every hesitation could be fatal. Carrick's movements were precise, calculated, a dance between predator and prey. He observed the subtle shifts in the environment, the almost imperceptible signs of presence, the faintest echoes that betrayed motion. In the Underhive, instinct alone was not enough. Anticipation, understanding, and ruthless pragmatism determined survival. At last he spotted the rogue psyker fully. Her small form crouched behind a broken machine, eyes glowing as she attempted to focus her powers. The mutants around her were nervous, sensing her power but unsure of the intruder. Carrick did not hesitate. He raised his pulse pistol, taking aim with deadly precision, but he did not fire immediately. He studied her reactions, the subtle shifts in posture, the faint tremor in her hands. Patience was the true weapon of a hunter. Then, with a swift motion, he fired, the bolt of energy striking near enough to unbalance, not kill. She screamed, psychic energy flaring uncontrollably, mutating the air with invisible forces. The mutants panicked, scattering into the shadows. Carrick advanced, chainsword ready, controlling the battlefield, guiding the outcome with calculated precision. Finally, the girl surrendered, realizing that resistance would be futile. Carrick did not gloat. There was no need. In the Underhive, mercy was irrelevant, and victory came with its own burden. He had secured his first prey, but the hunt was far from over. The information she provided promised greater dangers ahead, more lucrative bounties, and the inevitable moral compromises that came with survival in the Imperium. Carrick Voss led her through the twisted corridors, deeper into the Hive, where shadows were longer, danger was greater, and the next hunt awaited. In the grim darkness of the far future, there was no rest, no peace, only the hunter and the hunted, bound by survival, instinct, and the unforgiving law of the Imperium. Carrick Voss moved through the twisting corridors of the Underhive with the rogue psyker in tow, her small form pressed close to him, eyes wide with fear and defiance. Each step took them deeper into forgotten sectors, where the air was heavier, tainted with chemical smoke and the lingering warp corruption that clung to the Underhive like a malignant fog. Mutated creatures skittered in the shadows, scavengers that had adapted to centuries of industrial decay, their eyes glowing faintly in the dim light. The girl's psychic aura flickered in sporadic pulses, betraying her anxiety and her awareness that survival depended on obedience, or at least cautious cooperation. Kerrick's boots clanged softly against the metal floor, each step measured, deliberate, echoing faintly through the cavernous tunnels. He did not speak. Words were unnecessary. Observation, patience, and anticipation were his language, and the girl was learning it quickly. By the time they emerged into a vast, abandoned transport bay, Kerrick had memorized every vent, every pipe, every shadow where a potential threat could lurk. The transport bay stretched like a cathedral of industry, its ceiling lost in darkness, massive cranes frozen mid-motion, rusted containers stacked in precarious towers, and the skeletons of long, dead shuttlecraft littering the floor. This was the kind of place where death was as common as dust, and the week rarely lasted an hour. The girl stopped, pressed herself against a container, and whispered warnings about patrolling servitors. Kerrick's eyes narrowed. He understood immediately that this was no idle threat. These servitors were not simple machines. They had been warped, augmented, reprogrammed, some with weaponized limbs, some with psychic dampeners designed to suppress rogue abilities. The Imperium did not waste resources on mercy. Kerrick pressed forward. His pulse pistol hummed faintly against his leg, chainsword at the ready, his scanners flickering with readings of every living thing in the immediate area. The girl led him through the maze of containers, cranes, and dead shuttles, occasionally pausing to point toward shadows that betrayed movement, heat signatures hidden among rust and decay. It was a dangerous game, and Kerrick knew that any misstep could alert rivals or the Imperium itself. He moved silently, weaving through the terrain with the precision of a predator and the patience of a philosopher who understood that every second counted. Hours passed, the dim light flickering and sputtering, reflecting off puddles of contaminated water and puddles of strange, glowing sludge. The girl led him to a central chamber, the walls lined with conduits and broken consoles, the air thick with the metallic tang of machinery and ozone. In the center of the chamber, a figure crouched, hunched over in concentration, a rogue tech priest. The creature was an abomination by Imperial standards, once a loyal servant of the machine god, now corrupted, selling forbidden STC data to orc warbands for gold or survival. Kerrick's scanners flared with psychic and technological readings. This target was dangerous, far more than the girl had led him to believe. The tech priest noticed them immediately. Servo arms whirred, weapons emerged from hidden compartments, and the air vibrated with energy. Kerrick assessed, calculated, and acted. He didn't rush. He didn't bluff. He had survived countless hunts because he understood timing better than any opponent. A single miscalculation could trigger the tech priest's defenses, and given the nature of the machine's modifications, such an encounter could be lethal. He moved to the shadows, scanning for weak points, anticipating every motion, his mind working faster than any human should be able to process. The confrontation began with sudden violence. Servo arms lashed out, mechanical fists crashing toward him, sparks flying as Kerrick ducked and rolled, his chainsword slicing through metal cables and scorched conduits, the air filled with the sharp smell of burning wires and ozone. Kerrick returned fire with his pulse pistol, precise, deliberate, hitting joints and exposed mechanisms without wasting energy on ineffective shots. The tech priest reacted with unnatural speed, servos spinning, weapons discharging energy blasts that scorched the walls, melting the floors. The chamber was chaos incarnate, a storm of steel, sparks, and psychic interference. Kerrick pressed forward, calculating every step, predicting every counterattack. He had fought adversaries who were faster, stronger, more numerous, but he had learned that patience, observation, and ruthlessness were superior to raw power. He feigned left, then struck right, using the environment to his advantage. Collapsed machinery and crates became shields, conduits became obstacles for the enemy. Finally, a well-placed shot to the central servo node disabled one of the tech priest's arms, and Kerrick closed the distance, chainsword humming, sparks and metal shredded as the mechanical limbs resisted, but Kerrick's precision was unmatched. The tech priest was immobilized, though not destroyed, leaving him enough leverage to extract information or deliver payment to the Imperium. Even in victory, the dangers did not cease. The chamber's alarm systems had been triggered, and a wailing klaxon echoed through the tunnels. Servitors, long abandoned but still functional, activated, and rival hunters, drawn by the scent of bounty and chaos, would arrive soon. Kerrick had seconds, not minutes. He dragged the tech Priest to a hidden maintenance hatch, securing him with chains and restraints, and prepared for extraction. The girl, now a reluctant ally, watched silently, her psychic glow dimming but persistent, as if testing her own limits and learning from the hunter she had once feared. Carrick moved through the maintenance tunnels, narrow passages that twisted like the intestines of some enormous beast. The air was thicker here, carrying whispers of warp, taint and industrial poison. Occasionally, he had to pause, scanning for traps, rival hunters, and hidden threats. One wrong turn could mean death, one miscalculation could turn the hunter into prey. He reminded himself silently that in the Imperium, survival was a matter of anticipation, cunning, and a willingness to do what others would not. Morality was a luxury, and mercy was weakness. They emerged near the edge of the Underhive where a shuttle waited, waiting for extraction. Carrick assessed the area carefully. The shuttle was a small, unassuming craft, with enough concealment to avoid patrols, but its approach would still attract attention if alarms were raised. He moved the tech priest carefully, positioning him for quick extraction, while the girl remained close, her psychic senses alert for incoming threats. Carrick's mind was a machine of calculation, entry points, exit strategies, contingencies, enemy movements, all processed in rapid sequence. The shuttle lifted, but not before a patrol of rival hunters appeared in the distance. They had come for the bounty, no doubt drawn by the alarms or word of a rogue tech priest moving through the hive. Bolt of fire erupted, the echo of gunfire bouncing off the walls of the Underhive like thunder. Carrick fired back with precision, his pulse pistol striking weak points, disabling weapons, and creating chaos. The shuttle lifted further, engines roaring, and he dove into the hatch, pulling the girl and the tech priest inside just as the first rounds hit the metal exterior. Sparks rained from the hull, and the Underhive below was bathed in fire and smoke. As they ascended, Carrick allowed himself a rare moment of reflection. This was the life of a bounty hunter in the Imperium, constant danger, endless calculation, and brutal, merciless confrontations. There was no reward without risk, no victory without compromise, and no survival without ruthlessness. He had succeeded in the first major contract, secured his prey, and avoided death by seconds. But he knew the Imperium had many more tests ahead. Each contract escalated, each hunt became more dangerous, and the cost of failure was always life itself, or worse. Even the girl, once terrified, began to show signs of understanding. Her psychic flares were less erratic, her movements cautious and deliberate, as though she were learning the rules of survival in the Underhive from Carrick Voss himself. He allowed no sentimentality. Attachment was a liability, and the Imperium demanded efficiency over emotion. Yet, even in this grim world, he recognized the value of alliances, however temporary, and the girl could provide an edge in future hunts. By the time the shuttle exited the Underhive and entered the polluted skies above Tyros, Carrick's thoughts had already shifted to the next contract. The rogue psyker had led him to a larger, more dangerous network of targets, each one more lethal than the last. There would be no rest, no respite. The Imperium did not reward the wary, and survival was a matter of constant vigilance, ruthless calculation, and mastery of both the mind and the body. He looked at the tech priest, at the girl, and allowed a faint smirk to cross his scarred face. The hunt was far from over. As Tyros, IX shrank beneath the shuttle, swallowed by clouds of industrial smoke and the faint glow of distant warp taint, Carrick Voss prepared for the contracts to come. The Imperium demanded bounty hunters, and in the grim darkness of the far future, bounty hunters like him were indispensable, feared, and alone. The hunter and the hunted existed in a perpetual dance, and Carrick had learned to lead that dance with ruthless precision. The next hunter waited, and he would meet it as he had met all others, with patience, cunning, and lethal efficiency. Carrick Voss had become accustomed to the chaos of the Underhive, to the constant roar of industry, and the whisper of warp taint in the shadows. But the contracts that now awaited him were unlike any he had faced before. The Imperium's enemies were no longer isolated criminals or rogue psykers. They were networks of conspirators, cults devoted to dark gods, and warlords who trafficked in secrets and blood alike. The shadows of the Grimdark universe were thickening, and Carrick, as always, would walk within them, his chainsword humming and his pulse pistol ready. The girl he had spared, now an uneasy companion, had led him to intelligence that no Imperial agent had been able to confirm. A cult, devoted to the chaos god Nurgle, had infiltrated a series of Hive sectors, spreading corruption and disease while remaining invisible to the authorities. The target was a leader among them, a man who wielded influence and terror with equal measure. Carrick studied the reports carefully, scanning his equipment and checking his weapons, knowing that a misstep here could mean death or worse. In the Imperium, failure was rarely forgiven. He traveled to a Hive world on the fringes of the sector, a place scarred by years of neglect, where factories had fallen silent and the underlevels were alive with pestilence and whispers of dark power. The air was thick with decay, each breath carrying the sting of rot and chemical corrosion. Carrick moved with purpose, slipping past patrols and gangs, using the girl's psychic sensitivity to detect hidden threats. She was invaluable in these shadowed zones, though he treated her as a tool, never a companion. In the world of bounty hunters, attachments were liabilities, and trust was fleeting. The cult leader's lair was hidden beneath a cathedral that had long been abandoned, its spires broken and walls covered in mildew, and the creeping influence of warp energy. Carrick approached with caution, every sense alert. The corridors leading to the inner sanctum were lined with traps, sigils etched in blood, wards that pulsed with psychic energy, and the bodies of those who had failed the cult's tests. The air vibrated faintly, as though the very stones resonated with the dark power of Nurgle, and the flickering light revealed forms that were not entirely human. Carrick did not flinch. He had seen horrors before, but each new encounter reminded him that survival depended on ruthlessness and patience. He moved through the corridors silently, chainsword humming softly in anticipation, pulse pistol scanning for signatures of life, warp energy, and mechanical traps. The girl whispered warnings, pointing out symbols and movements he might have otherwise missed. They passed rooms filled with rotting offerings, bubbling pools of green sludge, and the faint whispers of the damned. Carrick's mind worked faster than ever, calculating every path, every possible engagement, and every contingency should the cult detect their intrusion. In the heart of the cathedral, the cult leader awaited. He was not merely a man but a vessel for corruption, his body twisted by disease and warp energies, his eyes glowing with unholy fire. Around him, acolytes chanted, their voices a blend of devotion and madness, and the air shimmered with psychic energy. The room was a storm of corruption, and Carrick knew that a direct assault would be suicidal. He would need strategy, deception, and every ounce of his lethal skill. He observed the room, noting positions, patterns of movement, and the focus of the cult leader's power. There were openings, small but exploitable, and Carrick began to manipulate the environment. He triggered minor explosions with carefully placed charges, creating confusion and forcing the cultists to scatter. He moved like a shadow, striking with precision, using his pulse pistol to disable, disarm, and distract, while his chainsword found gaps in armor and flesh alike. Each strike was deliberate, calculated, and devastating. The girl remained close, her psychic senses detecting threats he could not yet perceive. At one point, a warp-tainted creature lunged from the shadows, and Carrick anticipated its movement, striking with brutal efficiency to neutralize it before it could reach them. The fight was as much mental as physical. Every action had a reaction, every decision a consequence. Carrick understood that here, hesitation equaled death. As the battle raged, the cult leader unleashed his full power. Dark energy erupted from his form, twisting the air, bending light, and sending waves of nausea and fear through the chamber. Carrick felt the psychic backlash but pressed on, relying on instinct and his years of training to shield himself. He had faced psychers before, rogue and untrained, but this was different. The corruption was palpable, heavy, and insidious. The Imperium had left worlds like this to fester, and bounty hunters like Carrick were often the only force capable of intervening. Carrick's strikes were precise, targeting weak points revealed through observation. His chainsword tore through warped flesh and corrupted armor, his pulse pistol striking with pinpoint accuracy. The cultists fell one by one, their chants dying in screams and sparks of energy. The girl helped where she could, her psychic pulses guiding him, her fear tempered by necessity. They moved as a unit, predator and guide, against the tide of corruption that threatened to overwhelm them. Finally, Carrick confronted the cult leader directly. The room seemed to shrink as he approached, the air thick with the stench of disease and warp energy. The leader lunged, a blur of unnatural speed, swinging a blade warped by corruption. Carrick met it with his chainsword, sparks flying, metal screaming against metal. Every strike, every block, every movement was a test of endurance and skill. The clash of weapons echoed through the cathedral, and time seemed to slow. Each heartbeat amplified in the cacophony of battle. Carrick pressed forward, exploiting every weakness, every hesitation. The cult leader's arrogance was his undoing. He underestimated the hunter who had learned patience, observation, and ruthlessness above all else. A final strike, precise and unyielding, severed the leader's connection to his psychic power, leaving him weakened and mortal. Carrick did not pause to gloat. The Imperium demanded results, not sentiment. The cult leader was captured, or at least neutralized, and the girl's psychic pulses confirmed that the immediate threat was ended. But the victory was only temporary. As they exited the cathedral, Carrick observed the shadows. Other factions were already moving, drawn by the disturbance, hungry for the bounty or revenge. The Imperium's eyes were never far, and rival hunters would seize any opportunity to claim a kill or a contract. Carrick's mind was already planning the next moves, escape routes, contingencies, and fallback positions. In the world of bounty hunting, the end of one battle was merely the beginning of the next. They navigated the surrounding sectors cautiously. Carrick knew that in the shadows of the Imperium, alliances were temporary and enemies were ubiquitous. Trust was a commodity he could not afford, and sentimentality was a liability. The girl remained close, learning from each step, each decision. But Carrick's focus was absolute. Every action was calculated for survival, efficiency, and completion of the Imperium's mandate. Or at least the contracts he had accepted. Hours passed, the shadows lengthened, and Carrick's mind never rested. He reflected on the lessons of the hunting: patience over impulse, observation over strength, and ruthless pragmatism over morality. The life of a bounty hunter was a constant negotiation with death, a dance in which hesitation was fatal and failure irreversible. Yet, despite the danger, he thrived in it. Every hunt sharpened his skills, every contract tested his limits, and every victory reinforced his reputation. As they prepared to leave the sector, Carrick allowed himself a rare moment of contemplation. The galaxy was vast, corrupt, and indifferent. The Imperium demanded obedience but provided little guidance or protection. Bounty hunters like him filled the gaps, enforcing justice, exacting revenge, and surviving where others would perish. Carrick understood that he was alone in this universe, but that isolation was his strength. Dependence invited betrayal, attachment invited weakness. The girl, once prey, was now an ally of circumstance. Her insights and psychic sensitivity were invaluable, though Carrick reminded himself that she was a tool, not a companion. In the Grimdark universe, survival required clarity, ruthlessness, and the ability to act without hesitation. Emotions were a luxury, trust a dangerous gamble, and morality a hindrance. Carrick had long since embraced the truth: the hunter survives, the hunted dies, and the Imperium continues, indifferent to both. As the shuttle lifted off, carrying them through polluted skies and into the uncharted reaches of the sector, Carrick's thoughts had already shifted to the next contract. There would be no rest, no peace, only the continuation of the hunt, the pursuit of targets, and the navigation of the shadows. The Imperium demanded bounty hunters, and Carrick Voss was among the deadliest. In the Grimdark universe, where corruption, violence, and death were constants, he moved like a shadow, patient, calculated, and lethal, always one step ahead of both the hunted and the hunters who sought to claim his contracts. Even as the shuttle disappeared into the hazy atmosphere, Carrick knew that survival was not a matter of chance. It was a matter of calculation, skill, and unwavering focus. He would continue to hunt, to strike, and to survive in a universe that offered no mercy, no respite, and no forgiveness. In the shadows of the Imperium, the hunter ruled, and Carrick Voss was the apex predator. His chainsword and pulse pistol the instruments of inevitability. The victory over the cult had barely settled when Carrick Voss sensed the first ripple of betrayal. In the grim darkness of the Imperium, every contract, every alliance, and every interaction carried the shadow of treachery. The girl, once prey, had become his guide and occasional ally, yet even she could not shield him from the subtler dangers, those that came not from monsters or warp-tainted enemies, but from hunters like himself. Rival bounty hunters, opportunists, and those hungry for reputation moved in the shadows, waiting for a misstep, a moment of vulnerability, an opening to strike. Carrick had learned to anticipate these threats, but even the most seasoned predator could be tested. He traveled to the desert wastelands of Viridian 3, a planet where the sun burned mercilessly and the surface was scarred by centuries of mining and war. Sandstorms were frequent, and the winds carried fine particles that wore away both machinery and flesh. His target this time was a former ally, Rylus, a hunter whose reputation had once been allied with Carrick's own. Betrayal, Carrick had learned, was often the most dangerous form of enemy. Rylus had allied himself with Chaos cultists, seeking to claim the bounties Carrick had meticulously secured over years. The hunter became the hunted, and the desert would be the arena. Carrick disembarked from his shuttle into the scorching landscape, the sand crunching under heavy boots, chainsword at his side, pulse pistol ready. The desert stretched endlessly, broken only by jagged rock formations, the remnants of mining operations, and the occasional ruins of forgotten outposts. Every shadow could conceal an ambush, every dune a sniper's vantage point, and the wind carried the faint whispers of distant death. Carrick's scanners flickered constantly, analyzing heat signatures, psychic disturbances, and mechanical traces left by his rival. He knew Rylus's style: aggressive, opportunistic, and ruthless. Confronting him would require more than skill. It would demand cunning, patience, and exploitation of the environment. The first signs of Rylus's trap came subtly. Heat signatures scattered unnaturally, the sand above faint depressions indicating movement, and distant echoes of mechanical wearing. Carrick paused, lowering his body close to the dunes, observing and calculating. One wrong step would trigger explosives, ambushes, or attacks from hidden cultists aligned with Rylus. Carrick moved slowly, each motion deliberate, minimizing his footprint while maintaining vigilance. The hunter's mind worked like a machine, weighing probabilities, predicting enemy movement, and preparing contingencies. Suddenly, the ambush erupted. Cultist gunfire cracked through the wind, their weapons augmented by stolen Imperial technology, and Rylus emerged from the haze, pulse rifle aimed, a cruel grin etched across his scarred face. Carrick reacted instantly, diving behind a ridge of sand while returning fire. The desert became a battlefield of heat, sand, and motion, a brutal arena where cover was sparse and death was inevitable for the unprepared. The crackle of energy weapons and the hiss of bolter rounds echoed across the dunes. Mingling with the roar of the wind, Carrick fought with precision, exploiting the uneven terrain, using dunes as shields, and guiding his shots with lethal efficiency. The girl's psychic senses helped, warning him of hidden movements and predicting Rylus's attacks. Every strike, every maneuver was a calculation, every breath measured, for even a single mistake could be fatal. Rylus was a cunning opponent, striking from unexpected angles, retreating when necessary, and forcing Carrick to adapt continuously. The battle was not just physical, it was mental, a chess game played with bullets, blades, and psychic insight. Hours passed in a blur of combat. Sand clung to sweat and blood alike, creating a mask of grime over every exposed surface. The sun beat down relentlessly, and fatigue crept into muscles that had been pushed beyond normal limits. Carrick pressed on, relying on experience, instinct, and an intimate knowledge of survival in hostile environments. He anticipated Rylus's movements, exploited minor errors, and slowly turned the tide. The girl remained close, her psychic pulses guiding him, her presence both a boon and a reminder of the stakes. Finally, Carrick forced Rylus into a narrow canyon, where the wind whistled through jagged rocks and the shadows created perfect cover for ambushes or traps. Rylus lunged with desperation, pulse rifle blazing, but Carrick had predicted the move. He sidestepped, chainsword slashing, energy sparking as it met reinforced armor. Rylus staggered, but the fight was far from over. The canyon amplified every sound, every movement, turning the battle into a cacophony of violence and chaos. Carrick pressed the advantage, exploiting Rylus's overconfidence. He manipulated the environment, causing sand to shift, rocks to tumble, and the canyon to funnel his rival's movements. The fight became a brutal dance, each combatant exploiting skill, strategy, and instinct. Carrick finally disarmed Rylus, pulse pistol pressed to his chest, chainsword humming at his side, the desert wind carrying the echoes of their struggle. Yet victory came at a cost. Carrick was wounded, his armor scorched and dented, muscles strained, and every breath a reminder of the limits of endurance. The girl had helped, but the psychological weight of betrayal and violence weighed heavily. Carrick's thoughts were clear, though survival required ruthless efficiency, unwavering focus, and the willingness to embrace the reality that death could come at any moment. The Imperium demanded results, and the Hunter's Code allowed for no hesitation. He left Rylus incapacitated but alive, a message to all who might consider betrayal or ambition against him. Survival was not just about skill, it was about control, intimidation, and the demonstration of lethal efficiency. Carrick knew that other hunters would watch, other rivals would plot, and the universe would continue to throw challenges at him, each one more dangerous than the last. The desert had tested him, as all hunts did, and he had survived, not just through strength, but through cunning, foresight, and an understanding of the unforgiving nature of the Imperium. As the sun dipped below the horizon, turning the sand into a sea of orange and gold, Carrick reflected on the brutal truth of his life. Each hunt, each contract, each confrontation was a reminder that survival was a matter of calculation and ruthlessness. There was no glory in mercy, no reward in hesitation. The hunter endured, adapted, and prevailed, while the hunted perished or betrayed their own limitations. Carrick Voss had survived again, but the universe would not grow kinder. And the next challenge would come swiftly. Even the girl who had once been prey and now served as his guide understood the harsh lessons of the desert. Her psychic senses remained keen, but she had seen the reality of betrayal, combat, and survival. Carrick allowed no sentiment. Attachment was weakness, and the Imperium rewarded only efficiency. The bounty hunter's life was solitary, brutal, and unforgiving, but it was a life he had chosen and mastered. By the time Carrick returned to his shuttle, the desert stretched endless and merciless beneath him. Sandstorms raged in the distance, the remnants of Rylus and his cohorts left behind as testament to the hunter's precision. The galaxy beyond was vast, corrupted, and indifferent. The Imperium demanded bounty hunters like him, and in return offered nothing but danger, contracts, and the endless necessity of survival. Carrick Voss prepared for the next hunt, knowing the universe offered no reprieve. The hunter would continue, moving through shadows, hunting the guilty and surviving the treacherous alike, in a dance as old as the Imperium itself. Even as the shuttle ascended into the polluted skies, Carrick's mind calculated the next steps, the next contracts, and the inevitable confrontations that awaited. The hunter's life was a relentless cycle of violence, deception, and survival. Each victory was temporary, each contract a challenge, each shadow a potential threat. Yet Carrick thrived in this environment, moving like a predator through the endless darkness of the Imperium, chainsword humming, pulse pistol ready, and mind sharpened to the precision that defined the apex hunters of the galaxy. In the desert wastelands, under the unforgiving sun and the indifferent gaze of the Imperium, Carrick Voss had proven once again why he survived where others perished. The Hunter's Code demanded nothing less vigilance, ruthlessness, and the relentless pursuit of survival in a universe that rewarded none but the strongest, the cleverest, and the deadliest. And Carrick would continue, unyielding, unstoppable, a shadow in the grimdark night, forever the hunter. The galaxy beyond the Hive worlds was indifferent, vast, and unforgiving, a canvas of stars that held death and opportunity in equal measure. Carrick Voss sat in the cockpit of his shuttle, pulse pistol resting at his side, chainsword strapped to his back, and the rogue girl beside him, eyes glowing faintly as she observed the endless void. They had survived the Underhive, the shadowed cults, and the desert wastelands, yet Carrick knew the hardest hunts were yet to come. Survival in the Imperium was never certain. Each contract, each bounty, was a gamble with life and death as the stakes. The next target was whispered in the data, slate like a ghost. A high-ranking warlord who had amassed power on a fringe world, trafficking in gene, seed, illicit technology, and war crimes. This was not a simple capture. It would require infiltration, manipulation, and the lethal efficiency Carrick had honed over decades. The Imperium demanded results, and the hunter delivered without question. He did not contemplate morality, he contemplated survival and completion of the task. In the Grimdark universe, ethics were a luxury few could afford, and Carrick had long abandoned such pretenses. Upon arrival, the world was a fortress masquerading as a city. Massive walls of reinforced metal and stone encircled the capital. Patrols scoured every sector, and mercenary factions served the warlord as both enforcers and advisors. Carrick observed from the shadows, analyzing patrols, entry points, and surveillance patterns. Every detail mattered, every observation could mean life or death. His scanners picked up heat signatures of guards, hidden sensors, and subtle psychic fluctuations, traces of the warlord's own minor psychic augmentation. This hunt would test not just skill, but strategy, patience, and the ability to anticipate every contingency. He moved through the city like a ghost. Markets bustling with civilians provided cover, yet danger lurked everywhere. Rival hunters, drawn by whispers of the warlord's bounty, prowled the alleys, ready to eliminate any competitor. Carrick's mind mapped every path, noting vantage points, escape routes, and traps as he approached the compound. The girl's psychic senses proved invaluable, alerting him to hidden threats, concealed weapons, and subtle fluctuations in psychic energy that hinted at enemies beyond the line of sight. Every step, every breath, every decision was a calculation in a deadly game whose rules were written in blood. Inside the compound, the warlord's presence was unmistakable. Towers of steel and reinforced glass overlooked training grounds, workshops, and barracks. Carrick observed patterns, noting which guards were predictable, which doors were vulnerable, and where the warlord's attention was focused. Timing would be everything. A single misstep would alert the fortress, trigger reinforcements, and likely end the mission and his life. The approach required ingenuity. Carrick utilized stealth, sabotage, and manipulation, creating diversions to thin the ranks of guards. Pulse grenades, timed to create chaos, allowed him to infiltrate inner corridors unnoticed. The chainsword hummed quietly at his side, ready for close combat, its deadly edge a promise of precision when deception failed. Every corridor, every shadow, every corridor junction was accounted for in Carrick's calculations. He was methodical, deliberate, and merciless. Survival depended on it. At last, he found the warlord. Surrounded by elite bodyguards, the man exuded arrogance, relying on brute strength and technological augmentation to protect himself. Carrick observed for a moment, noting the rhythm of guards, their blind spots, and the subtle psychic dampeners that the warlord used to mask his own minor powers. Then he struck, pulse pistol fired with precision, disabling guards in rapid succession, chainsword cutting through reinforced armor with sparks and shrieks. The compound erupted in chaos, alarms blaring, lights flickering, as Carrick moved like a predator among prey. The warlord fought back with formidable strength, but Carrick's years of experience made him lethal. Each strike was calculated, each dodge premeditated. He exploited the man's overconfidence, used the environment to his advantage, and neutralized threats with ruthless efficiency. The fight was brutal, physical, and psychological. Every moment tested Carrick's endurance, skill, and ability to adapt to unforeseen circumstances. Yet despite the ferocity, Carrick remained focused. The Imperium demanded results, and failure was not an option. The battle concluded with the warlord captured but alive, secured with chains and restraints, a warning to all who might oppose the Imperium, or Carrick himself. The mission was a success, but the hunter did not linger. Survival demanded that he leave swiftly, avoiding reinforcements, rival hunters, and Imperial patrols who might question his methods. Every extraction was perilous, every escape a test of cunning and efficiency. Carrick had learned that victory was only temporary, a fleeting moment in a universe that offered no permanence, no rest. As he departed, shuttle engines roaring against the planet's atmosphere, Carrick reflected on the life he had chosen. The universe was vast, indifferent, and merciless. The Imperium demanded obedience but offered no gratitude, only contracts, danger, and the endless necessity of survival. Bounty hunters like him existed in the cracks, enforcing justice, exacting revenge, and surviving where others perished. Carrick had mastered this existence, though at a cost: isolation, constant vigilance, and the knowledge that every action, every decision, was a negotiation with death itself. Even the girl, now a reluctant companion, understood the harsh truths of the hunter's life. Her psychic abilities were sharper, her awareness keener, yet she had seen the toll that constant hunting and survival took. Carrick allowed no sentiment. Attachments were vulnerabilities, and weakness was fatal in the Grimdark Imperium. The hunter's code was simple: survive, adapt, and execute with precision. The universe was indifferent, morality irrelevant, and life fleeting. Carrick had embraced this fully, letting it guide every decision, every strike, every calculated movement. The journey ahead would be just as dangerous. Each contract brought new threats, new adversaries, and the constant weight of mortality. Carrick did not flinch from this truth, he thrived on it. The Imperium demanded bounty hunters, and the galaxy demanded survival. In the shadows, where morality and law were meaningless, Carrick Voss moved like a shadow, patient, calculated, and lethal. Every hunt reinforced his skills, honed his instincts, and confirmed his place at the apex of the grimdark world. As the shuttle drifted through polluted atmospheres and warp-tainted sectors, Carrick contemplated the essence of his existence. There would be no peace, no rest, only the endless cycle of hunting, killing, and surviving. Each contract, each target, was a test of skill, patience, and ruthlessness. The galaxy was vast, and the hunter's work was never done. Carrick Voss would continue, chainsword humming, pulse pistol ready, always moving, always calculating, a shadow in a universe that neither forgave nor forgot. In the quiet moments between hunts, when the stars stretched infinitely and the Imperium seemed distant, Carrick reflected on the choices he had made. He had spared lives when it served a purpose, inflicted death with precision when necessary, and navigated betrayal and treachery with calculated efficiency. Survival was paramount, morality was secondary. In the grimdark universe, the hunter alone determined the difference between life and death, between success and annihilation. Carrick understood this truth fully. The galaxy waited indifferent and relentless. The Imperium demanded results, criminals awaited punishment, and rival hunters lurked in the shadows, seeking advantage. Carrick's path was clear: hunt, survive, and adapt. The hunter existed in the tension between life and death, and Carrick had long since accepted that this was the only certainty. The universe was cruel, unforgiving, and endless, yet in its chaos, the hunter thrived. As the shuttle emerged into open space, stars stretching in all directions, Carrick Voss allowed himself a brief moment of satisfaction. The contracts were complete, the prey captured, the hunter victorious once more. Yet he knew that this moment was fleeting. The universe offered no reprieve, no reward beyond survival itself. Each victory was temporary, each hunter preparation for the next. The Imperium demanded bounty hunters, and the galaxy demanded vigilance. Carrick Voss would answer, always moving through shadows, calculating, and surviving in the grimdark night of the universe.